Good evening and welcome to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's virtual programs. We are broadcasting live from Prince George's County, Maryland. My name is Nick. Thanks for joining us tonight. Our program this evening is called Mental Health Tips for Parents During Lockdown. It features Sarah Garifo from our Spauldings Branch Library, who will be in discussion with Janet Gers, who is a local school counselor. They will discuss tips on managing your health and your children's mental health during this unusual time. Feel free to join us on the chat on whatever platform you're watching the program. I include the hashtag PGCMLS and feel free to tag us at PGCMLS. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the other end of the program. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Mental Health Tips for Parents in Lockdown. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, of course, but your mental health matters year-round. We're going to spend the next little while talking about ways that parents can care for their mental health and well-being, as well as care for the mental health and well-being of their children during these extraordinary circumstances that we all find ourselves in right now. First, some introductions. My name is Sarah Garifo, and I'm a librarian with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. I'm joined now by my dear friend, Janet Gers. Janet has been a high school counselor for the past 9 years, is that correct?
That's right.
9 years. She also has a physical fitness background, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit too. And she's the founder and president of the Heartstrong Foundation. Janet and I both have young children of our own, so today we're speaking as much from our own personal experience as anything. We've been navigating this new normal, as everybody calls it, of working, parenting, and to some extent supervising distance learning from home too. So welcome, Janet. Thank you so much for making this time for us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this topic. It's an important one.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So before we start, I just want to offer a few important disclaimers. Number one, because we know that we're speaking to so many of you right now, this conversation we're having is going to be intentionally broad. You may find that not every suggestion is compatible with your own unique circumstances, but we hope that this program sparks a bigger conversation within your home about how to tailor certain strategies to fit your own needs. And number two, of course, this program is not intended to replace the advice of your medical professional. So if you have specific questions or concerns about the physical or mental health of you or your child, please consult directly with your physician or your pediatrician. All right, so now that we've got that all out of the way, let's get started. All right, so like I said, welcome, Janet. So glad you're here. And I know we had talked a little bit about, a few topics we wanted to cover today. Where do we want to start?
Well, I liked the idea when we were talking before about how it's important to address the adult's mental health before you address the kids' mental health. One, because we can't give out anything if we're not filled up ourselves. But then two, we model so much for our kids. They watch us all the time. So I think for that twofold reason, we should start with how do we keep ourselves mentally in check and balanced and everything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I will definitely find that when I look back on a day, and if I find that like this was a particularly tough day with the kids or they were really struggling, I can really point to every single place that I was struggling and I was having a hard day. And of course, it, like you said, it all kind of stems from that because they're watching us and they're absorbing how we react to our circumstances and how we're feeling. So what does that look like right now when we're under a lot of extra stress and things are very weird and we don't have our normal, even our normal creature comforts, like trips to Starbucks or Target, those little mom field trips. What does filling up our cup look like right now?
Well, I like that you use the phrase reacting to our circumstances, because lots of times I feel like we try to control way too much that we don't have control over. And so when we try to control something that we don't have control over, and then it inevitably doesn't work out, we feel like a failure or that like I can't actually make a difference in the situation. And that leads to us feeling more empty and emotionally drained. So I think step one is recognizing what do we have control over and what do we not have control over. We have no control over the fact that we are in this pandemic at all. We have no control over other people's actions and choices and anything like that. But we do have control over, we can choose our own happiness. We can choose to be happy. And we can also focus on what we have control over. Like, are you staying home? Are you being safe? Things like that. So I think choosing each day to recognize the difference between what you have control over and what you don't have control over, and then put your energy into what you have control over I
Mhm.
think is the first step.
Yeah, and that's something I've had to continually practice because it can be very overwhelming when you are watching the news or seeing, what everybody else is doing, and it's really scary. And I guess it's important to stay informed to an extent, but also, like you said, recognize, keep your focus small. What can I do within my household today to keep us safe and healthy and continuing to move forward, moment by moment. Sometimes it is usually moment by moment.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like watching the news and staying informed is important for that purpose, staying informed. Like you don't want to watch the news to get freaked out. So if you do start to watch news and you start to feel, if parents start to feel that anxiety building, remind yourself, what is the purpose of me watching the news right now? Have I gathered all the information I need? If so, and you're not getting any more new information, just turn it off. It's
Yeah.
not helping you.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
pandemic is still going on, period, end.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and I think now more than ever is a really good time to practice those boundaries of what we allow in, and like you've mentioned, how we spend our energy, and what we choose to focus on.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think something else that's important that we brush aside a lot is recognizing that people are going through different stages of grief right now. There's
Mhm.
a lot of sense of like grief and loss, and it looks different for adults than it does with kids. So validating our own sense of grief and loss with it is really important. Then we can help kids address it too. And to me, like I don't think we have control really over how our emotions hit us, but we have control over what we choose to do to react to them.
Mhm.
So, and modeling that for kids too can help and give us the sense like that's something we can control is how we react to our emotions and how we validate them and talk about them.
Mhm.
I think that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to spend a little bit of time here in this space talking about grief because that's I think there started to be more of like a widespread recognition among a lot of people that that is what we're feeling right now. I think grief is this huge umbrella term that covers all these complicated feelings we have right now. These feelings of loss, um, and even just loss for um, knowing what comes next. And I think it's funny because when times are normal or things are going relatively well, things are moving along, you can say that um, you don't know what's going to come next, but it's not the same as like when that security is really gone. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, and we really are living in this like moment to moment, and it can be hard to parent from a state of grief because you're trying to care for yourself in that moment. As we said, you're trying to work through your and process your own feelings, which are complicated and entangled, and like you said, also giving space for the kids to understand their own grief too. Um, talking about how they miss their friends at school or at daycare, and they even miss going to the playground, all these normal things that are part of their daily routine, and holding space for them, I think, too, and just be really open about, yeah, mommy's sad about that too.
Yeah. And the more we can talk about grief and those feelings, the more it actually makes us emotionally available to help them process their own grief.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I think grief is something that we are, I don't know if it's like an American thing or whatever, but we are so afraid to talk about grief in like a common space.
Yeah,
And
we're
I
so
think,
bad at grief. We're so
yeah,
bad at grief, like
I
culturally.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know if it's because like grief usually comes with crying and we're afraid of crying. I have no idea, but I think you're totally right. This whole situation creates an opportunity for us to talk about it because we have to, because everybody's experiencing it.
Hmm.
I heard an awesome quote. So, everyone says like, oh, we're all in the same boat. So we're all dealing with the same thing.
Hmm.
There was a quote saying that we're actually not in the same boat. We're all going through the same storm, but our boats are completely different. But
Oh
the
yeah.
circumstances, it just gave me such a good visual. And that's so true about the grief feeling with this too. Everybody's grief is going to look different for different reasons.
Hmm.
And even if you as an adult don't know why you're feeling the way you're feeling, processing it out loud in front of your kids or even with your kids, if it's appropriate, helps them feel like it's okay that they don't have the answer for their feeling either. And it's okay to process and talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that. Because I think it's started to wear on some people's nerves, this idea of we're all in the same boat, because a lot of people are, no, we're not. No, we're
Yeah.
like, I'm, there's lots of ways that, I'm fortunate in this situation that I know others aren't. And there's a lot of ways that I'm struggling in this situation that I know others aren't. And so, um, but yeah, it's like the first time that we can all, well, maybe not the first time, but one of those rare times in our lives where we can all point to the fact that we are in that same storm together in some way. Um,
Mhm.
and I appreciate that gives us opportunities to reach out to people. I think it opens up, um, it opens up that conversation, because you kind of can probably already guess that your friend or your family members are struggling. And so it's allowed me to be more vulnerable with the people that I love and just reach out and say, hey, how are you feeling? Because I'm not feeling so good today, you know.
Mhm. And it gives us the opportunity to really listen, to ask how people are and actually listen. It's
Hmm.
so easy to say, how are you? And then blow it off. But like, no, I actually want you to tell me. And people can feel that. People can feel if you're actually being sincere with that question. And that opens up more doors and actually helps us stay more socially connected, which we need more now than ever.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think everything you said about, people knowing when you're genuinely listening and genuinely interested, our kids are that, like, so transparently. They know, if we're engaging and really want to hear them talk about, um, what they're going through. And like you sort of mentioned, giving them a language to help process their emotions that's age appropriate. Because even we as adults don't always have that language to process our emotions. So it's an ongoing process together.
Yeah, it totally is right. Like we're experiencing brand new emotions, and so we don't always have the labels for those.
Hmm.
Something that might help younger kids with processing it is I've noticed, at least with my oldest child, she's 4.
Hmm.
She does this almost like a role reversal summary of the day, where she is the mommy and her dolls are the daughters. And
Ah,
so she will say, "Mommy had to work a lot today." And then like referencing herself, she is the mom who had to work a lot today. So
mhm,
then I ask, oh, well, how did that make her dollies feel?
mhm,
And so I'm hoping that the emotions she's communicating that her dolls were feeling are actually her emotions of the day.
mhm,
So that's been interesting. And that's just something that just came out kind of naturally in our conversations, just like getting her ready for bed or something like that.
yeah,
So even if kids can't like say, I'm feeling frustrated, they can say, well, Dolly really wanted to play with mommy a lot today and I couldn't. So
mhm,
then you would say, oh, so did you feel frustrated? So, so meeting them where they are, I think helps the kids a lot, and not really trying to we don't need to introduce new vocabulary to them.
mhm,
I think meeting them in their space and working with what they're offering to us,
yeah,
I think helps them give them a space to process how they're feeling.
yeah. And it just makes me think of that term of like emotional intelligence. And that's what we're giving them the space to, that muscle to stretch, that emotional intelligence. Um, and yeah, without it being a, excuse me, a high pressure, high stakes conversation, you're just playing. And that's how kids are going to learn and process and communicate with you, is through play.
Yeah. Yeah. Play offers a lot of good space. Yeah. And actually, bridging from the idea of play, I want to talk about how important it is to maintain some kind of structure or routine for kids, because
Mhm,
that does allow them to have space to process and to play. And like that's where a lot of their emotional reflection is going to happen.
mhm,
So I guess what I would want to say to families is even if your routine looks different now or has to look different now, um, totally okay. Just come up with one. So
mhm,
even if your day used to start at 7 and now it starts at 8 for whatever reason,
mhm,
still go through the same steps that you would normally do to start everyone's day off.
mhm,
Or that way the kids can predict what's happening. And the more you can predict what your day looks like you were mentioning earlier, the more we can predict, the more space we have to deal with the unknowns.
yeah.
So that as much as it helps adults too, it really helps kids a lot to, even if the timing's not the same, just go through the same steps so that they know what to expect. That does really help them.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's definitely something I want to talk about, is like our experience with creating a routine during this. And it's been a learning process, and we didn't get it right the first time, and we're not, nobody's going to get it right the first time. We
Yeah.
started with really high expectations. That's another point we'll come to later, is expectations. But we had a really strict schedule in place and a very firm structure that we wanted to follow, um, because we wanted to try to just keep the wheels turning, keep it moving the way it was before. Um, and that didn't last us very long, because it can be exhausting to have such a strict idea of what your schedule is going to be. Um, and just like always being on top of it. It got to be too much, and we overcorrected and we threw the whole thing out the window. And that was fun for a couple days until it wasn't. Until, like you said, we were noticing that because the kids didn't know what to expect during the day, what was coming next, and there wasn't that opportunity to say, okay, we'll play for a little while, and then you can have some time to yourself. Give them that rhythm. So yeah, we quickly discovered that no routine was not the answer either. So we're trying to find that happy middle of having some expectations, and like you said, just doing the things you would normally do during the day. We have our little pajama parties every once in a while, but for the most part, we're getting up, we're getting dressed, and really getting into the day. And this is coming from like my old teaching background. Having an objective, whether or not you state it directly to the kids, but having your own objective in your day for like, what can we do today, and keeping those objectives small and manageable.
Mm-hmm.
So
well,
you're working towards something.
Yeah, well, and I like that you said that it's like one objective for the day and it's small.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's crucial because like let's phase into the expectations talk. We're like touching on it. Let's just jump into it.
Yeah.
So yeah. So with the expectations thing, right? With every new situation, we need to reevaluate what the expectations are in that situation. Mm-hmm. And I think stating the objective every day can help with that a lot. Because if your objective for the day is, I want everybody to end the day happy, or I want to make sure everybody ends the day having eaten 3 meals, like whatever your objective is for the day, that'll help set your expectations for the day. Mm-hmm. And I think with this new normal, it's totally okay to scrap all expectations, start with 0, and then see what natural expectations make sense for your family. Mm-hmm. Like, is the expectation that every other day we are not in our PJs every day? Yeah. Right. Or is it like the expectation is that you get dressed for the day and then we'll see what happens? Or is it you need to make sure you play with your sibling happily for 15 minutes? So like, I think starting from the ground up and seeing what flows best for your family, because what flows best is what's really going to stick. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And getting rid of like, and for ourselves too. We can't be expected to work. We're doing 3 things right now, if you think about it, right? Mm-hmm. We are trying to teach our children, we're trying to parent our children, and we're trying to work.
Which is, I'm going to say it's impossible. It is truly impossible to do those 3 things, or to do them well simultaneously. So yeah, finding that whatever flow works for you to just get done what needs to get done, and not worry so much. I hope that, I know I feel like I'm a little all over the place here, but it's all connected. I hope that we come out of this with less of this sense of competitive parenting that I think is really toxic and has been taking over a lot of, and it causes unnecessary stress as parents. And some of that comes from social media and just this idea of that, like, you're performing parenting and putting it out there, like, what a great job we're doing. I hope that this kind of strips that all away. Like you said, we're all in the same storm of parenting together in some way. And there's no right way to do this. There's no way to like win quarantine. You're just surviving, and that's okay. And if you are thriving, then like, good for you. Whatever you're doing, like, keep it up. But if you're surviving, that's good too. We talk a lot about the importance of having like a good enough day, and good enough is, that's kind of all I can hope for most days. Good enough.
Yes. And that's actually something I share with my students a lot too. Like, if you've put forth your best and it was truly your best, then, well, and this is for like an academic setting, but whatever grade you get is enough. It is good enough. Mm-hmm. And that we totally need to do that for ourselves. Like, mm-hmm. if we get through the day and we've done our best in all the different crazy areas that we have to be a different persona, and we've done our best, then it's good enough. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. And we need to be like satisfied with that.
Yeah.
That we just need to like let that sit. I'm so glad you brought up the competitive parenting thing, because it's like, it's too much. We're all in this together. We're all in the same parenting storm, like you said. Like, yeah, let's just be chill.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And oh gosh, that made me think of something. Um, we'll come back to it. If I remember, we'll come back to it.
Well, I do think that we are going to also come out of this um, with more confidence, maybe as parents. Like, if we can get through this, bring it on. We can get through anything.
Literally survive anything. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we're going to switch gears slightly now, but it's all really related. We're going to talk a little bit about this idea of balance and what it looks like to have a balanced day, or even just feel balanced. And sort of like we talked about, when you've got these three major roles that you're trying to do simultaneously, that can feel impossible. So how do we start approaching that feeling of balance?
Well, I think we need to look at what encompasses a balanced life and what we need to feel both mentally and physically healthy.
Mhm.
And before all this, right, like everybody talked about, you need to eat right, you need to make sure you exercise, you need to make sure like you're drinking enough water and you're getting enough sleep.
Mhm.
And pandemic or not, those things still apply. They're just harder to make sure we're achieving with all this.
Yes.
So, it is definitely still important because it's not just staying mentally and physically healthy, but managing stress is so important when all of our stress levels are elevated.
Mhm.
So putting an extra effort into maintaining the balance of our life is even more important now. And you can make it a family goal. So maybe one of the goals or objectives for the day is, how do we make sure we achieve balance for everybody here?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Does that mean everybody is like trying a new fruit or something like that?
Yeah.
Right? Or does it
A
mean
piece of broccoli. Just get a piece of broccoli on the plate.
a piece of broccoli? Yes, yes. Or does it mean like, okay, today we are all going to bed at our respective bedtimes because we all need to get 8 hours of sleep,
Mhm.
right? Or is it we're all going to go for a family walk together because the exercise is going to help all of us feel a little bit better?
Mhm.
So I would love to say the harder life gets, the more you can just toss stuff out the window, but it's actually the more we need that stuff
Yeah.
incorporated.
Yeah.
So keep
Yeah.
up, keep the multivitamins, keep
Yeah.
the variety of fruits and veggies, like stuff like that. Like we really need to do that.
Yeah, and I've definitely found that to be true, because I know, the days that I don't somehow manage to get out for a walk, whether by myself or with the kids, or where I'm just eating junk because it felt good, like in the moment, like by the end of the day, I feel so much more depleted and so much more exhausted and frustrated, because I'm just, and it sounds cliche, but like I'm not fueling myself properly. And like you said, that we're doing so much with so little right now. We need as much fuel as we can get. So, uh,
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up those 2 points about the walk, and if you don't get that, how you don't feel filled up, and then also the food piece of it too, because if we start to feel sleepy like in the middle of the day, like I've been having urges to like have random naps in the middle of the day, which I never had before.
mhm.
And instead of actually trying to lay down and take a nap, which honestly, who can with like everything we're trying to do?
Yeah, right.
If you
And you
actually
always feel so much worse
you
afterward.
do, yeah. But if you instead went for a walk or like did 10 jumping jacks or like did something active to get your blood flowing, that's
Mhm,
actually going to kickstart your energy system better than
mhm.
trying to do the like half sea nap situation.
Yeah.
So there's
Because I'm
that,
going to keep you up all night anyway. So will it have been worth it?
right?
Speaking from experience.
Right. Yeah. But
Yeah.
also the food piece of it too. Like lots of times, if we're not feeling good, if we're just like having a blah moment, we're like, oh my gosh, let me just have this comfort food so that I feel good about myself because
Mhm.
I made this choice for myself, or whatever mental talk we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
But in actuality, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
The food that we actually need to be reaching for are the fruits and veggies and the good protein and things like that. And that's actually going to help us feel better, because our brain is telling us, nope, go for those brownies, go for those chips, when
Yeah.
it really should be like, no, grab the apple, that's actually going to help you feel better.
Mhm. And it's funny because I think of it in terms of like practicing what you preach, because I would tell my kids, on like 99 days out of 100, no, we're not going to have brownies for breakfast.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm encouraging them, because I'm the one who's setting that example for them. I'm the one who's offering them these like healthier choices. Um, I can't then turn around and like, you know, have my like pint of ice cream.
Right, 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 because they're watching us.
Yeah, yeah. And I should, um, treat myself the way I would treat my kids.
Hmm.
which I think even kind of goes into a bigger conversation about what it looks like to be kind to yourself during this time when things feel really hard and when you make mistakes or lose your patience or get frustrated. And that can really quickly turn into what my favorite author Brene Brown calls a shame spiral, because you're just beating yourself up for making these mistakes. And whereas if your kid like makes a mistake, or your friend, somebody that you love, you're not going to spend the whole day berating them for it. Like, you're going to tell them like it's okay, and we learn from it and we move on. So I think being willing to talk to yourself like you would talk to somebody that you love. That's just like a general thing that I think more people should take on, is like mental health. No, like you said, pandemic or not, just treating yourself like somebody that you love, and giving yourself that grace when you screw up, because congratulations, you're human. You screwed up.
Well, I think that's perfect, because we talked before too about the reason why you put your own oxygen mask on first before somebody else's, because you can't help somebody else if you're not filled. And having that different self-talk that you're talking about, where it's like if we actually treated ourselves kindly, we can then give kindness to the people that we do love, because now we feel fulfilled and we feel and like we're safe in a safe place. And that, I mean, that adds into the balance piece too. Like if we have that self-forgiveness of like, you're not going to get 8 hours of work done, 8 hours of teaching your kids in, and 8 hours of parenting in, because that's already 24 and somebody needs to sleep. Like, so it's that, so allowing yourself that like mental flexibility to have the balance and that positive self-talk and loving yourself, like everything that you were saying, it's going to like help lead into all these other things that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also, in a way, it even speaks to what we've mentioned already, which is like, what are your priorities during this time? And right now our priorities are, I think, are stripped down to the essentials of making sure that everybody is healthy and safe, and hopefully happy if we can get there. But that's also a roller coaster. But yeah, what are your priorities, and focusing your energy there. And not everything else is going to be at 100%, nor should it be. So
Yeah, it shouldn't. Well, and something that like we've talked about in this house too is that there have been like there's some like positives in this too, right? Like we're getting to spend so much time with our children,
yeah.
which is amazing. And so much time at home and together, and that's really nice. So one thing we're trying to keep in mind when we do get like really frustrated is, instead of wishing this to go away, think about, okay, it is going to go away at some point. And when it does go away, are we going to be happy with how we spent our time, with like what we did?
Yeah.
And that's not speaking to like, oh, did you do all that home improvement you wanted to do? Or like, did you finish that giant work project you really wanted to tackle? Not like that at all. But like when we reflect on this time, is it going to be filled with self-forgiveness and loving your family and enjoying and being grateful for the extra time? Or is it going to be filled with memories of frustration or just like feeling trapped? And we're in control of that piece of it. So that helps sometimes too, remembering that this is going to be over. And do we want to remember it as a frustrating time, or as a time where there are some blessings in this?
Yeah. Because I can't help but wonder sometimes, what my kids will remember of this. They're 3 and 5. So the older one maybe will remember a little bit more. I'm not sure about my younger one, but I'm always curious, what will they think of this time when they look back? And I try not to put too high of an expectation on myself here, but yeah, I hope that they can look back and remember that it was a time that we were together. And we started a new tradition in our house. Now Friday night is pizza and a movie night. And it's something that we can all look forward to together. They love it. They, they keep an eye out on the calendar, and it's something to keep us going forward. And I know it's something that we're going to try our best to keep doing, when everything goes back to whatever that new normal is. Friday night will continue to be pizza and a movie night. And I'm very proud of that that's something that we've, been able to add in, while taking away all the things that, don't matter quite as much.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be happening in some households too, like the establishment of new traditions and new, just like with a new flow of everything. And yeah, I think keeping them afterwards is going to give families a sense of, I did have control over this. There were things that I was able to establish and some positive that came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I'm going to pivot quite a bit actually, because I realized there's something I want to talk about, and that is what it's like to be parenting with a partner during this time, and just kind of touch on that very briefly, because I think mainly the mental health piece of that for me is having a good enough like relationship and communication with my partner to know when to ask for what I need and how. And if that is, I need to go out and walk by myself for 30 minutes to clear my head. And, thankfully he's flexible enough, and, we find ways to make that work in our schedule. But yeah, I know that could be a whole other conversation about what it's like to be, essentially co-parenting right now. But can you kind of speak to that at all from your experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely puts a different dynamic on the parenting roles, because you're not just getting them dressed and getting them out the door in the morning and then doing family time at night, right? It's constantly all day long, and this give and take with work expectations and responsibilities too, and also wanting to make sure that the kids feel loved and everything. And
Mhm.
I think having the same thought and objective for the day is super helpful. Like,
Yeah, so you're on the same page.
right. Yeah. Like if there's two different objectives for the day, like I'm going to do the gardening and the laundry and the blah, 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 blah. Okay. Well, now that means that the other person is going to be doing kid stuff all day. And was that on their agenda?
Right.
So like having the same expectations of the day, but then also like being able to look at each other once in a while and be like, well,
Yeah.
those are those days, and that's
Yep.
okay. Oh,
Mhm.
well, you know,
Yep.
yeah. So I think being on the same page and communicating for sure. But I like that you said that, we need to be practicing and being able to recognize when we need help and when we need space, and being able to ask for it.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, that skill set has definitely been worked on a lot in this house, like being able to step back and say, okay, okay, I need a little break. Like, can you step in or take over? Or after you're done with that, like, I need to address this. And
Yeah.
just having more of like a fluid conversation. We tried to have a like set schedule also,
Mhm.
and it doesn't work. It
Yep.
it just it doesn't work. It has to be like, you can start the mornings the same, but the rest of the day it really needs to be fluid. And so communication is like, needs to be 100% there
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not only what I've been practicing is, knowing when to ask for what I need, but also knowing that my husband is not going to ask for what he needs, because he's going to feel like he's got to keep going. He's putting up this like front, and I have to be willing to say, hey, you need a break. Let me, like, you go out for a walk, you take a break, and I'll take the kids. And it kind of gives that whole, like, it encourages that give and take. Because he's so, always been so good about offering that time to me. Like, I need to also offer it to him too, and recognize when he needs a break, and then we can come back like refreshed and ready to go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Asking for what you need, balance. um, you know, Another writer I love, Glennon Doyle, she talks about how, she says the word crisis comes from, the word meaning to sift. And so it's like sifting out all the things that don't really matter, all that little stuff, things that would have bothered you before, or that would have taken up your time and mental energy before. That all falls away, and what you're left with are the things that can't be taken away from you, the things that are the most important, those priorities, your family, your health and well-being, like, those things that are so essential to you. um and to that point, I think, what I found is that I don't really have time to be, again, frustrated about the thing, like these little things that I would have been frustrated about before. I noticed that, like, my husband and I bickered about something silly the other day. We were both exhausted, and you know, I walked away, gave myself 5 minutes to breathe, and I was back like cracking jokes, because I'm like, it's time to move on. Like, we can't carry that silly like bickering any further, because who's got the time, to even devote to that. So, we were able to like let off a little steam, burn it out, and then just get back into it.
Yeah, when even it's like we've been talking about, like creating the mental and emotional space to like process all this stuff. Like, you're right. Like, there's no room for that. there's no room, because we need that, the extra mental space, we need that to keep the processing going, to like manage the day. So like, yeah, like if I get frustrated because I used to get frustrated by like a pileup of like recyclable things or whatever in like a corner, and I just look at it now, I'm like, well, I could deal with it too. Like I can stop being grumpy about it and just deal with it. You know, like it's not, I don't know, stuff like that. It's not, it doesn't feel like personal affronts anymore. It's more like, okay, like it just accumulated and happened, and like I am in control to deal with it. So I'm just going to deal with it and like not worry about it. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, we definitely don't have the space. So I think you're right. I like that idea, that visual of like the sifting thing, because it is sifting out all that other stuff that shouldn't matter. And
Mhm.
then it's leaving behind like that core foundational stuff that it can't be taken away from you, regardless of pandemic or not. I'm glad you phrased it that way. That's a good, like, no one can take the, I don't know, it's a good visual.
Yeah. Yeah. And in an interesting way, it kind of like brings me back to what we were talking about before with this idea of grief. And I'm thinking particularly about like, we've been talking about our younger kids, but your older kids that you work with in the high school, and the grief that they're experiencing. Um, and they're losing some of these rites of passage, or this ability to experience these rites of passage, like graduations and proms. And made me think of that, because what I want to say to them is that that core foundation of like who you are and what you achieved is still there, and nobody can take that away from you. It's it's heartbreaking that they can't walk across the stage when that's what they were looking forward to, but that doesn't change all the hard work that they put into it, the fact that they did graduate. But I know that's easier said than done, because I'm not the one who's experiencing that particular grief. So um, is that something that you've kind of been talking about or addressing with like your students, and how to process?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. When I think the biggest piece for them is the social piece, right? Like that they are so isolated. I think the sense of closure is coming with its, or lack of sense of closure, I guess, it's coming with its own set of grief for them. They, like you said, no one can take away the fact that they are graduating from high school.
Mhm.
And I think they are going to be the ones to realize that earlier in life than we ever, our previous generations were ever able to realize.
Yeah.
Um, so they're doing a lot of growing up pretty quickly, but
Yeah.
also like it's so important for, we keep saying it's so important for us to stay socially connected, and the only way to do that for a lot of these kids is over FaceTime or Zoom calls or Google Meets or Snapchat, Instagram. But
Mhm.
that's not as fulfilling, or they're finding actually it's not as fulfilling as they need it to be.
Yeah.
So the social media stuff is, I guess they're wanting that more meaningful connection,
Mhm.
which you can't achieve on Snapchat.
Yeah.
So some of them are getting a little fed up with with those types of platforms, just
Mhm.
because they are wanting that, that socialization. So what we've been telling them is more what we were talking about in the beginning. Like, you need to focus on what you have control over,
Yeah.
and make changes or make waves in those areas. So so the hobbies that you never had enough time to do, now's your time, now's your chance. And
Mhm.
also sticking to a structure of the day. um, and how you need to get up by a certain time, you need to go through your normal routine. My school's offering online classes for the kids, so attend all of your classes, do all of your homework, but then also be done with your homework by like 5, and
Mhm.
then have family time.
Yeah. Shut it off. Have that boundary. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So that's helped a lot with our kids, like with the high school level, like just really enforcing and encouraging that structure, maintaining that structure, but then also saying this is time for you to really flourish in different ways that you weren't able to before.
Mhm. Yeah. And again, as we've kind of talked about, making the best of all the weirdness of the situation, and making the best of this new sense of time and opportunity that we have, um, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about, having those limits and those boundaries on your time, because I think as much as possible that's helpful, of course, for us as parents too, to have that boundary, because I think um, it we're learning what it means to work from home for a lot of us in professions that wouldn't have worked from home before.
Mhm.
You and I, particularly, like as a school counselor, as a public librarian, I don't think we ever would have thought we would have been doing this much work from home, because it just didn't seem possible.
Yeah.
And it can feel like, well, I've got the access, I've got the resources here, like I should be working more, like I'm available. but of course I'm not available 100%. I mean, of course, my, um, supervisors and like administrative team have been very supportive of the fact that, I'm not, we're not available 24/7, and nor should we be.
Right.
um, but
Right.
yeah, as much as possible, even having physical boundaries to help the kids understand and to know like what's work time and what's play time. So they always do their schoolwork. My son's in kindergarten, so he's got his schoolwork, and my younger one, he does some educational apps. That's at the kitchen table, and that's where that takes place. And so they know when they're sitting down, like that's what they're working on now, and they can get up and play like somewhere else. So it helps them kind of keep it in space. I've got my my office door closed. It's such a simple thing, but it's a signal to everybody like, okay, my office door is closed, I'm working. And then when it's open, like, you're welcome to join me. So yeah, finding those ways that you can individually structure like your home and your day, if you have the space and the ability and the resources to do that, to set aside like what is work and what is play.
Yeah, no, that's so crucial. Yeah, because we tell our kids too when they are sitting down to do their homework, even when we were in session, I would tell my students, don't you ever do your homework on your bed.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't do it. Right. Because not only is it like it gets rid of that spatial boundary, but your brain actually gets super confused.
Yeah.
Because if you're telling your brain, I need to be productive and focused in a space where your brain usually sleeps,
Yeah.
now your brain is like, I don't know what to do here. So then your sleep quality is going to go down and your work productivity is going to go down.
Mm-hmm.
So having, those physical spaces in your home, if you can, is like really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And it'll help you be more productive too. If you do your work in your office, your brain is going to be in that work mode, and so your productivity is going to be higher.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to like work in the kitchen where you're also trying to cook dinner and you're on the phone with a coworker, like when all those spaces get blended in your brain can't do any of them well.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that this is a good thing to talk about for sure, because it's not just the physical space of like signaling to your family and signaling to yourself, like, okay, now I'm working.
Mm-hmm.
It's a signal to your brain too.
Yeah.
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 But also we need to also recognize that our brain has to flip back and forth a lot between different roles throughout the day. So that transition time to flip back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
like we need to give ourselves that transition time, and your productivity during the day for your work or your kids or your household, whatever goals, is going to be lower than it would normally be. And you just need to be okay with that.
Yeah.
We just need to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned transitions, because anybody who has as, as a parent or as an educator, like how transitions are such a crucial time between like activities, and we need that time too. And I think we take that for granted or assume we can just like multitask, which is a word I don't love because nobody can multitask. It's like literally not possible.
Yeah, there's no such thing. It's not real.
Yeah. Like unless you have your headphones in while you're going for a walk and you're listening to a podcast, I accept that as multitasking. Anything above that, not
Nope.
possible.
Nope.
So giving yourself that time to transition between activities, and that can be a notoriously hard time for kids, especially if they're doing something that they're enjoying and it's time to transition into something that they weren't looking forward to as much. So how you manage those transitions, that's like, for me, that feels like 90% of the work of the day. That's in those like small little moments, that adds up. And whether that's having a plan in place. So we use a timer system. So it's like you're doing half hour of schoolwork, and when the timer goes off, and it's both a visual timer, so they can actually see the time counting down, and then they hear the beep, beep, beep. Now it's time to switch. And just with practice and doing that, they've come to really understand what that timer system means. So it doesn't feel arbitrary, like I'm just coming in and saying like, okay, like iPad time's done, time to go on to the next thing.
Take it away.
Feel really like shocking. Like if I were in the middle of Netflix and somebody just like took my iPad away, I'd be like, I'm sorry, excuse me, what? I need the time. So yeah, respecting that. And it'll take a little bit of, it might take several minutes or longer to get to the next activity, but that's okay too. Just being flexible with what those transitions look like.
Yeah, we so the my daughter's daycare usually uses a timer system for their transitions also, and they
Mhm.
have the visual one. And so we got a little tiny one where you can see it count down,
Yeah.
and then like because we were like, okay, let's just replicate what they do at school at home, and it'll be completely seamless and perfect, right?
Mhm.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work. The timer is a toy, and the beeping is like not respected, and I think it just doesn't work with the flow of the way our family stuff goes, I guess.
Yeah.
So what we have found is helpful is if we're able to say, okay, we're going to do breakfast, and then you'll have playtime until the youngest one goes down for her nap, and then when she goes down for her nap, then you can do X.
Yeah.
And that like, I guess maybe it's speaking to the predictability we were talking about before. Like, so my oldest now knows what is coming next, and so
Mhm.
that seems to help her with the transitions.
Yeah. And
So
without, in her case, getting too distracted or bogged down by like the timer itself, which, yeah, can be a whole thing. I'm glad that you mentioned that, like, there's another alternative that worked better for you because, again, it's just everybody's house will be different and everybody's
right.
needs will be different.
Right. All
Yeah.
the same storm, just different boats.
Yep.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, yeah, it reminds me of, and again, kind of talking about that competitive parenting thing. You get so much advice from from people. You get so many very specific suggestions of like, you should do this because it worked for me. And it takes a while. It's taken me a while as a parent to build that confidence to say like, that's great for them, not for me. Great for you, not for me. And
Totally.
knowing, and um, it's weird. Like, I'm still, as with my oldest only being 5, I'm still getting used to this idea that like I'm totally in control of what energy comes into this house and um you know what attitudes come into this house. So I get to decide, like, you know 10 other people told me this thing worked, and like, it didn't work for us. It's okay. We try the
Mhm.
next.
Yeah. Well, and we know our children best, right? Because they're our kids. We've been raising them. And so like
Mhm.
suggestions are awesome because it helps us like think about other ways we could be approaching things, but totally okay to be like, that's totally not going to work. And I know that. I'm glad it worked for somebody else, but not going to work for me. Or, okay, well, try it. And then if it doesn't work, don't try to like force it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that being, it's that interesting, like, balance or like tightrope walk between being flexible and sticking to a plan that works.
Mm,
um,
yeah.
because sometimes we've gotten so committed to thinking like, oh, this plan is working for us, and then we realize like months later, like, oh, that wasn't working at all. We were just stubborn. We were just pushing forward with a routine or a plan that wasn't working, and saying like, all right, let's scrap it and try something else.
I'm
Or
glad you're differentiating between the difference between stubborn and scheduled,
yeah.
because there's totally a difference. Yeah. And stubborn, I think, is where some people get caught into like those little micro battles with your kids sometimes. And I mean, everybody does it. We do it too. And you have to take a moment to step back and allow yourself that self-reflection time of like, why didn't that work?
Yeah.
And then when you think about it, you're like, oh, it's because like we didn't tell her ahead of time, or like she thought it was going to go one way and then it went another way, like at the turn of a dime, and she can't transition that like that. It's, and so when we're able to, because who has time to self-reflect right now? But
Yeah. Right.
yeah, but yeah, like yeah, you're totally right.
Mhm. Let's see. What's something that you've been doing, like, what's been one like self-care treat like that you've given yourself to kind of just like indulge and feel better just for yourself during this time?
Ooh, I can think of things that I like to do, but I'm trying to think if there's like a consistent thing. Yes. Yes. Okay. So at the end of the days, like during the work week, oftentimes I have to get up early and do work before the kids get up, or I'll stay up late and like do work after the kids go to bed, which is exhausting.
Yeah.
So my shut it down boundaries are set, feeling good, is that we turn on Netflix and watch something that's like totally like just funny, right? Like
Mhm.
not stimulating at all, just
Mhm.
totally funny. And that actually helps me look forward. Like if I know that that's the goal for us for Tuesday night, my
Mhm.
Monday and Tuesday, like I'm going to work harder to get all the things done that I need to get done.
Mhm.
And then having that at the end, is really helpful. Other things that like I enjoy doing would be like, exercising or like meal planning. I like doing that too. But like the actual like, nope, this is totally to help me feel good. We're watching Community right now on
We
Netflix.
did too. We did too. That was ours. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, like this is like our time. Like it's just me and my husband just hanging out together, being like another high five. We made it through another day. Let's just laugh at something stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because that was like a show that we started watching together like when we were first dating. So it's always like a comfort show to go back and rewatch it.
Totally.
So yeah, that's something that we had to like look forward to, pretty much every night. Like, okay, everything else is done or done enough,
Yep.
and we're gonna like watch an hour of Community together. And I told him, I was like, I look forward to that. Like that's one of the things I look forward to the most in the day. And so it was like just a nice way for us to bond and also like, yeah, turn off our brains like
Yes.
at the same time.
And just like end the day.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes it really does. At the end of the day, like you end up in bed and you're literally just like, what just happened? What
Yeah,
was that
like,
day I just had?
right. Yeah, and especially if you have been like needed all day long in different aspects and you don't have that time to like push the pause button before you go to bed and then you wake up the next morning and then just like jump right back into it again. Like we definitely need that block of
Mhm.
like, no, nobody has needs for me right now. I have no
Mhm.
other obligations right now. I
Yeah.
need to just be.
Yeah. I always
Yeah.
say that like, yeah, that time when the boys go to bed and like everything else shutting off, I'm like, nobody is allowed to ask me a single question right now.
Yeah.
Nobody's allowed to ask me
Yeah.
for anything.
Nope.
I mean, of course, kids have their own ideas about that, so it doesn't always work out. But mentally, I'm just like, whew,
Right.
I've,
Off.
I've hit
Turned
I've
off.
hit my limits.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So there were a couple resources that I wanted to share with our audience before we before we close. And let me share my screen real quick so you can see what I've got here.
Yeah. I'd love to see what you have.
Yeah. So this is, let's make that bigger so you can see. This is the Children's Mental Health Matters Early Childhood Book List. So try saying that 5 times fast. This is a resource that was put together by the Maryland, let's see, just actually a whole bunch of different organizations. You can see here at the end, put this together. The Office of Head Start, the Maryland Department of Health. And these are suggestions for books for, and this is mainly for children like ages 8 and under. I'll slow down my scrolling a little bit. About books that help you have conversations about feelings and mental health and opening up those conversations. This is such a great, I would say it's definitely, of course, not comprehensive because there's so many out there, but I mean, it's a great start because this is like a huge long list. So yeah, below is a list of books for reading with your younger child or recommending that they read on their own. And this was released, as part of the Children's Mental Health Matters.
And where could viewers access this list?
That is a great question. Oh, here we go. Right at www.childrensmentalhealthmatters.org. This
Perfect.
was shared with me by a trusted colleague. Um, so yeah, how to talk about feelings, happy feelings, sad feelings, being angry or mad. And,
So at
again,
the bottom, there's one of a few titles about grief.
yeah. So, great place to open that conversation too, because, we talked about how play is such a natural way to open up those conversations with your kids, and that reading time that if you can have, like some shared reading time at the end of every day, that's also a good opportunity. Like they can be just like funny books. We've been going through all the Captain Underpants series right now, but you can also incorporate some of these too, just as a way to, like I said, just open up that conversation and ask questions. Um, that's a great, and it's just a great bonding time with your kids at the end of every day. Even if you can read to them for 5 minutes, that's like a super valuable way to spend 5 minutes of your day. So that's a very specific resource, like I said, for our parents of younger ones here. And in general, I just wanted to point everybody to, this is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. This is just a great general resource, like any time of the year, no matter what. There's all kinds of specific resources for, of course, they've got some tips for work, dealing with the stress and anxiety of COVID-19. If you're dealing with like a specific mental illness, either for you or your family members, and even some tips for teens and young adults, and again, helping them understand change right now when their brains are already in a very volatile sense of change as teenagers anyway. So helping some great resources for helping give them that like stability and having those conversations. Because again, that's what I want to, I think, underscore more than anything here is that this is just an opportunity to open up the conversation in your own house about what you need, what works for you, and how you can reach that goal of good enough.
It's a good goal. Good
Yeah.
enough.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Was there anything that anything you wanted to kind of to circle back on? Anything that you think we might have missed?
I don't think we missed anything, but I think keeping in mind that we are all in the same storm, different boats.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way you navigate this is going to be what's right for your family. And keeping in the back of your head, when this is all done, what do I want the memories to be of this time? And if there's anything that you can control about those memories, like take them by the reins. It's okay to, take control and say, no, like we've had if you're noticing we've had a very frustrating time with this whole thing, what are some little changes you can make to your day that can help address that and kind of turn the mood of the house around a little bit? And I think you might be surprised, families might be surprised. It could just be one or two small things where the children feel like the adults are in control and the kids are safe. Like once those things are kind of established, you can just build on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing I also wanted to make sure that I mentioned before we left, and I think the schools have been doing a pretty good job of communicating this, but just to underscore that you are not expected or able to replicate a school day in your house. It's just not possible. It's not a good, I would say it's not a good goal to have to say like, all right, school goes from 7:15 to 2:15 and it goes like this. It's just not possible. And it's not ideal. So finding ways to break up that time, have a little bit of learning time again, and alternate with activities that are fun, and don't feel like you even have to replicate, sitting at the kitchen table works for us, but don't feel like you have to replicate this idea of like sitting in a desk for hours at a time. It would drive anybody crazy. So, and finding other ways to kind of introduce those skills, but in a more hands-on way that they wouldn't have the opportunity to do at school. Like our science and math lessons here are baking cookies. So, it's funny because I think it's a great idea. They're not as into it as I am. They just like the finished product, but I can sneak in like a quick fractions lesson before they run off. So, as much as you can, like try to even have a little fun with it. I know that can seem like one more thing you're being asked to do, but like you said, we're here together. So what do we want that time to be, and what do we want those memories to look like? Yeah, like you said, you get to make those choices.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again so much. This was such a good conversation. I feel renewed by this because I'm coming away with a lot of good ideas.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yes.
this sense of like, all right, like we can do this. We can take this step and like, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to just, continuing the conversation in our family and encouraging other people to have the conversation too. So yeah, thank you again. This was Janet Gers, my friend, high school counselor, just like all around wonderful person. And so, so thank you it was such a pleasure to talk to you today.
It was so fun. No, and thank you again for having this conversation and putting this out there, because I do think I'm glad you're labeling it. This is a conversation, and families need to have this conversation. That's all this is. Mm-hmm. So this is so important to talk about, and we keep talking about it. So thank you for creating this space for us to launch a conversation.
Yes, absolutely. My pleasure. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to this evening's Prince George's County Memorial Library System virtual program. It was great to have you with us. We thank Sarah and her guest for their amazing discussion tonight. And thank you, Janet, for your contributions. And we will look forward to seeing everyone again at a future virtual program. We have great programs happening all day, every day, starting tomorrow morning with live virtual read aloud at 10 a.m. in English, followed by Biblio Niños, which is Spanish language read aloud at 11 o'clock, with many more events to come beyond that. So thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you again soon. Have a great evening.